Well, this is a great showing. I know we have a combination of both students and um, program directors, doctoral program directors in our Zoom today. And I'll take a minute. I'm Mimi Chapman. I'm the president of the Group for the Advancement of Doctoral Education and Social Work. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with our president-elect, Tova Walsh. I'm at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Tova is at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And we are really grateful to our panelists today, and Tova is going to introduce them, and then we'll get started. We have prepared some questions, and if you all want to put questions in the chat as well, we'll try and incorporate those into the mix.
Thanks, Mimi. And so, folks, I think you have access to the Q&A box for questions, but not the chat. So I'll just mention that we'd love to have your questions in there. I am really happy to introduce this wonderful panel to you. I'm going to name them, but not go into long introductions, because our first question is going to be to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves and their career paths. So I'll let you do the more extended introductions. But I am thrilled to welcome Bart Klika, who is the Chief Research Officer at Prevent Child Abuse America. Subharati Ghosh, who is a Senior User Experience Researcher at Meta. Michelle Robinson, Chief Programs and Partnerships Officer at the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, and Betsy Olson, who is a Professor of Geography and the Environment at UNC Chapel Hill. We are excited to hear from you all and get ideas about broadening job searches for doctoral students coming out of social work PhD programs. And so to start, I want to ask each of you to introduce yourselves by telling us a little bit about your academic and career trajectory. So if you could tell us a little bit about what led you to the PhD and the types of things, the work you had in mind when you entered the program, and if that shifted, kind of how that shifted in terms of the kinds of things you were looking for by the time you came out, and kind of how you made those choices about next steps coming out of your PhD. So Bart, if you want to get us started by telling us a little bit about your path, that would be great.
You bet. And thanks for having me here. So hi, everyone. As Tova said, I'm Bart Klick. I serve as the Chief Research Officer at the National Office of Prevent Child Abuse America. I'm a social worker by training, although as we talk about trajectory, I actually got my undergrad in psychology because I didn't know that social work existed. And so I was on my pathway to get my psychology degree, and met with one of my professors and said I wanted to get more experience. Like, what I was learning was so interesting, but I wanted the application piece. And so I set up what was a practicum as a psych student. And so I got course credit for actually working directly with kids and families. I soon joined a organization that was doing community-based foster and adoptive care work. Worked there for about 4 or 5 years doing direct service work in rural Montana. So I was doing going out working with families who otherwise were miles and miles from services, from a lot of things. And so that's where I got my start in the field. And frankly, that work was very intense. I needed to make a change, and went on for my master's at the University of Chicago, now the Crown School. And during that time, I was convinced I was going to be a therapist. And so I took every single clinical course that I could. I was like, I don't want to take any policy courses. I don't want to take any research course. Just give me every clinical course you have. And then as a work study job, I started working on a research project. And I attribute the trajectory of my career to a really good mentor who really saw my interest in application of work, but also that spark of curiosity of being able to ask and answer really important questions for the field. And that led me to go pursue my PhD. I went to the University of Washington. Worked with Dr. Todd Herrenkohl doing some secondary data analysis work. I knew that, I wanted to get back to Montana, and was fortunate enough while I was still ABD to get a tenure-track position in the School of Social Work at the University of Montana, and worked there for, I think it was 3 or 4 years on faculty. Was doing a number of different things nationally, some through the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. And that just opened me up to other national organizations. And a position came up about 9 years ago at Prevent Child Abuse America, where the person would be leading research and evaluation for the entire national organization. My partner did not want to move back to Chicago, but I was like, how about we move back to Chicago? And fortunately got the position. And I feel like, hopefully we'll get more into kind of the day-to-day, but it's a very applied position. I get to use all the training that I received throughout my career, and really work at a national scale and work with amazing people who are on the ground doing prevention work. So it's nice to see you all.
Thank you. And we'll definitely get more into your day-to-day. Shubha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Shubha, and I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm currently a senior user experience researcher with Meta Facebook, and I work on Meta's recommendation systems, on the AI recommendation systems, building models. My journey, very similar to Bart, actually. I did my undergrad in psychology. And as I was in my second year of my program, I'm originally from India, so we had a 3-year psychology program. And I realized like I'm a very applied person, and I just wanted to get more ground experience. And so I started interning and my passion area was in mental health. And I started interning and that was purely, actually not even interning, it was volunteering. So as to go on a weekend and kind of learn how to even work with people with mental illness. And then in my final year, there were 3 students out of the batch who got a chance to do a research project. And I just said that I'm going to do that. I had no idea what research was, but I thought that, okay, let me just do it. And I just got hooked onto, collecting data and going through the process and learning the systems. I also had no idea that social work was something you study. So, but I got to know from somebody and I said, it seems very applied. And so I actually did my master's in social work, and I specialize in medical and psychiatric social work in India. And then I was like, this is kind of the right fit because I was learning about like it's interdisciplinary. And I was like, I never knew that you could actually approach mental health. And I slowly got into the caregiving area. And so I was like, okay, this sounds really exciting. And one day when I was doing my research, I was doing my class project, I read this article by Jan and Marshall. And I was like, they seem to be doing the type of research that I'm really interested in. And so I started exploring universities and, I just focused on getting in UW-Madison because Jan and Marsha's the work was so like when I actually went back and looked at my PhD program proposal, like why I want our SOP, it was just like a perfect match. That's what I did. Like I was like so lucky. So that's how I landed up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was working with the Weizmann Center. And I just learned whatever I could. It was like my focus was trying to look at caregiving across the lifespan, and I looked at multiple caregiving roles, and I was very passionate. And back in 2010, the only trajectory you had was, or the one that I knew was, getting into a postdoc and then getting into a tenure-track. And then of course I did my postdoc at Brandeis and Northwestern, and then I went back to India. I was a professor there, and then when I went there, I had an experience where I was like, I had to like study very different types of research areas, starting from malaria and stuff like that. And that's what I realized, that I have the ability to kind of stretch my skill and my areas that I work in. And also I was trained as a quant researcher. I realized when I went back to India, there was no data. So that's when I started doing qual research. And over time, I became a mixed methods researcher. I just I just told myself I need to learn and this is what I need to do. And eventually I came back to the US again and I started working in a nonprofit where I actually implemented a program that integrated digital health on Fitbit and brought the perspective, like even actually working with Fitbit, like they had no idea that how to work with people with low income and with women and with low digital literacy. So the program that I built was very successful. That Fitbit made it like one of the pilot programs. It did a case study on how to actually have like implement digital wearables with low income population and low digital literate population. So that kind of got me the idea, the fact that I can actually bring that technology area is an area where, I could explore. And that's when I got into Facebook. And I first worked with Facebook privacy product, eventually moved to infrastructure, which is the back end. Then I moved to the Meta Superintelligence Lab on the new AI models, and currently I am in Meta recommendations. So I have been there, but I have used my research skills, the core research skills that I learned, how to be a good researcher, how to be a thorough researcher, and I have found it to be very successful in bringing me to where I am currently. So that's my story.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon or good morning, I guess, depending on where you are located in right now. My name is Michelle Robinson. I'm the Chief Programs and Partnerships Officer at a local not-for-profit called the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness that is headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. And we work at the local, state, and national level on things related to Black women's health. My journey, I would say, started as a child. I grew up and I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I always like to tell people that my parents are from rural Louisiana, the birthplace of what would become Louisiana, Natchitoches, which is where the French first settled, where the Caddo people were originally. My mom was born as a sharecropper. She was a child laborer. My dad lived in the rural town adjacent to it. And so they met in Houston. And as working class individuals in a predominantly Black community, I got to experience what it looked like to exist in a healthy, economically diverse Black community and to see that community destroyed. As a student, I was very curious about what was happening in my community. As an adult, I've learned a lot of things about the policy infrastructure and the decisions that were being made that shaped some of the outcomes of my community. For example, my community is the site of the first environmental racism lawsuit that set precedents. It's Being versus Southwest Waste Management. I grew up in a community where by my home on a bayou was a solid waste processing facility, and about 1,000 meters from my high school, there was the original contested solid waste processing facility, which was the subject of the lawsuit that the community rallied unsuccessfully, but they did rally to prevent. So I entered as a first generation student. I attended University of Texas at Austin, and I was actually on the trajectory to go to law school. I was in a criminal justice magnet program in high school. I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I was hoping to figure out what I could do with a law degree. But fortunately, by my second semester of my freshman year, my academic advisor introduced me to sociology, a word I had never even heard of before until they shared with me that I should take an intro to sociology course. And I did, and that really shifted the course of my thinking and frankly, my sort of professional, academic, and even my personal life. What I found in sociology was a framework to help me understand how do we think about how do you build social policy that serves people well? How do we leverage science to build policy that supports well-being? And so I got involved in research fairly early in undergrad. And specifically, I got involved in the opportunity to do applied forms of research, whether it was coming from a demographic lens, whether it was working with the state in education spaces, or even at the federal government. I interned in DC. I worked for the National Center for Education Statistics. things like that. So I've kind of had this, starting in undergrad, this woven of science and policy. I was very interested in research, and still, as a first generation person, didn't necessarily know all of the pathways ahead of me, but I was gifted, I was passionate, and I was a good researcher. And so I decided to go to graduate school and pursue my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have no family roots up here. Actually, it was the last program I applied to. My faculty advisor was like, let's go through your list. And then she was like, you haven't applied to UW, you have to apply to UW. It's the top program. Adam Gamron's there, because at the time I was really focused on education, and he was the premier scholar in sociology of education. So I applied to schools, got accepted to all, came and visited, and decided that Wisconsin felt like the best place for me. It was the place where I saw in my department an effort to create community specifically for underrepresented students, and that there was both the rigor and the opportunity to intellectually develop and to be supported in that way. So at UW, I came in on under a fellowship. I was very much on the traditional academic route. I was leading and supporting randomized control trials starting my first semester of grad school. And I was there very much on the faculty trajectory. I was publishing, I was working on research teams, all of those things. And I was also dealing with some deep personal conflict, because while I enjoyed the scientific production part, I was very frustrated with the applicability piece. It was sort of like, okay, we're creating all this knowledge, we're spending a lot of money and resources, multi-million dollar research projects I was working on, but it was not clear how did it translate, and what were people who were trying to create solutions, create programs, develop remedies, like how were they supposed to use that information? And so, frankly, I kind of went rogue. I think that part of what benefited me, because we often talk about first genness as a deficit, but my first genness was a resource for me. It meant that I didn't have a script ahead of me. I didn't know how this is supposed to go, right? Like, I didn't know the rules, the norms. I've just said, I'm getting a PhD, and I'm going to get the PhD how I want to get the PhD. And what that looked like first was starting to work to build community. I lived here in Madison. As I said, I have no roots here, but I am a person who's really good at building community. And I always have put my research, my academic career alongside my personal politics. So that looked like going out volunteering with community-based organizations alongside activists, using the particular skill sets that I had: research, science, strategy, project management, leadership, to support efforts that were happening locally. I also got involved fairly early in consulting, which is something we don't actually talk about when you are a advanced degree holder, and I got my master's along the way, my MS. You have skills that are marketable, and you can consult. So I had the honor of being the researcher behind a report that was commissioned by an organization that I don't think actually exists anymore, called the Association for Equity in School Funding. And their whole mission is, in Wisconsin, we actually have a constitutional amendment that requires that we are funding schools appropriately. It's baked into the Constitution. And so they wanted to develop a report to analyze whether or not we were upholding that constitutional requirement in order to facilitate a lawsuit. And so I got to be the researcher to analyze the data, and to prepare kind of this report and draft this report in which they pursued, and not successfully, but pursued a lawsuit. After that, I kind of worked on a couple of different projects ad hoc, and then probably the project that sort of really kind of coined me as a person is a place-based initiative called Race to Equity, which was a collective impact strategy focused here on Dane County, began with data analysis. In fact, one day my husband, who was working for doing restorative justice work at the YWCA, came home and said, hey, I got invited to serve on this advisory council for this new group that's trying to do some research on understanding sort of the state of Black folks in Dane County. And I said, Joshua, I should be there. And he's like, you're right. And so I showed up to this, I showed up to this meeting. And I showed up to the meeting and then they were like, we need you on this team. And they brought me on this team. And so I helped shape the Race to Equity report, which is a seminal report. It is an old report. It was released in 2013. It is still cited today, which gives me a little cringe because we need updated data. But that just sort of reflects kind of the impact that it had on the community as far as framing and shifting focus on the contradiction that existed in our community, where Dane County is a community of great affluence, but it was also a place where there were wide racial disparities, and that poverty itself was highly racialized and highly carried by African Americans. So I worked with that project from 2011 up till 2019 when I was approached by the Governor Evers transition team, who is our current outgoing governor, to step into a role of a political appointee. So I was not planning to transition, but I saw the opportunity at that time to take my interest in shaping policy and start doing that work at the state level. So I went and joined the Department of Children and Families under Secretary Emily Amundsen at the time, and it was part of her cabinet, where I worked on really thinking about how do we infuse a health equity lens into essentially child welfare, human services. So our Children and Families organization in Wisconsin includes our economic sort of supports programs, so our TANF programs, our child welfare system, and also our early care and education pieces, amongst a couple of other sort of ad hoc programs. I come from a health equity lens because my family has been particularly burdened by poor health outcomes. I lost my mom at the age of 21 while I was in undergrad, and she was only 52 years old. And 30 days later, her sister passed away, who I drove to her funeral. And so for me, it's been really important that I take my grief, my historiography, and I use the skill sets that I've been able to develop through my education, through my training, and through my professional experience to do the best that I can to build a world where preventable deaths can be avoided. So I'll stop there for the sake of time, but looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And Betsy, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with such amazing folks. I'm really enjoying this so far. And I suppose I'm a presenter, but thanks everyone who's gone already. My name is Betsy Olson, and as introduced, I'm a professor of geography at UNC Chapel Hill, which probably means that I'm the odd bird out for our topic, broadening your job search beyond the US Academy. But my narrative and my history, I think, helps to explain why I'm here. So I did the unusual thing of getting every single one of my degrees from CU Boulder. I started as a political scientist, international relations student, continued on into public policy. You'll notice a theme throughout what I'm about to tell you, which is that I like to think of it not as scattered, but instead open-minded. So I ended up in geography after taking one geography course, and I was like, my people, this is my place. And finished my PhD. And at that time, I was actually really probably a little bit confused about what I would continue doing. I had, on the one hand, a PhD advisor who was telling me, you know, you can be in the academy, you're going to be this like excellent scholar, you have all the potential, all the things that you need. And on the other hand, a bit of a flat job market and a challenge in seeing myself fit well within a geography department. I had done quite a bit of work in Peru up until that point, and so lots of my background has been travel and working in other places. And so at that time, my advisor, who was from the UK originally, encouraged me to just look elsewhere if I was uncertain about how I would fit in the US Academy. And so I applied for jobs in England. ended up receiving one of those at the University of Lancaster in Northwest England. And I had not spent any time in that region of the world ever. So I'd spent quite a bit of time in Central and South America, but not in the UK. I was in that position for a bit of time and then was asked to consider a position at the University of Edinburgh, still within the Department of Geography. I had already begun to expand also my networks a little bit more into my current network of collaborators, which is kind of through education, social work, and medicine, especially pediatrics. And so Edinburgh offered a few more things, but that was moving another country because they don't have exactly the same educational system in England and Scotland. And so then I spent many, many years at the University of Edinburgh until family life pressures made me determine that I needed to be closer to home. Of course, there's a caregiving narrative that runs through this whole story. And of course, as we're making decisions, we're rarely making them, as isolated individuals. And so by that time, I had 2 kids. I had really struggled to keep my work going in Latin America and had always wanted to work with young people. And the young people who wanted to work with me were caregivers in their homes. And so I sort of brought the knowledge and awareness that's quite well developed in the UK about young people who are caregivers with me to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I've been here for about 14 years, building and sort of breaking down networks around my work. That includes, I suppose, preparing a lot of students for various types of work. So because I'm kind of a crazy open-ended methodologist, I get a lot of folks working with me who aren't certain that they want to stay within the academy, and they see a lot of potential for working with communities or other things. So I've had some folks go into global organizations who work with toileting and access to toilets globally. I've had some of my PhD students go into headhunting, like that, the actual, curation and promotion of highly skilled individuals to either go into higher education or into other fields. And so I've been surprised throughout my career, both for my own trajectory. I never thought that I would work abroad. And I did, and I continue to sustain a lot of those networks through my research, and I spend a fair amount of time still with that. And I also didn't imagine, I think, when I first started in this position, that I would be working with so many students who had an interest in considering how their skills that they're developing, like the previous 3 speakers have, clearly demonstrated, how they become applicable in a broader world. And so I'm constantly being challenged to try to think about how do I prepare them for that. So hopefully that's enough for us to go on. Thank you, Tova.
Great. You want me to jump in, Tova? Okay. So we prepared some questions, and we're going to kind of skip some of them, I think, in the interest of time, and would also love to see your questions in the chat so we can make sure that we get to them. So let's see. Why don't we start out with thinking about what aspects of your PhD experience were really the most useful to you in preparing you for the job that you're in today. So we'll just leave it at that and try and make it simple. And if we can sort of be concise in our answers so that we can talk more and get more conversation going, that'd be great. So anyone who wants to jump in.
I can just go ahead. I think like the most important thing for the PhD program was learning the methodologies well. And I think asking questions and asking the right question, and also keep an open mind and be flexible. But in terms of learning, I would say what has come in really handy is methodology. So whether it's qual, quant, so focus on that because that's a skill set that's very unique. You can be thrown into any challenge.
I would add that the ability to synthesize large volumes of information and turn that out to people in a usable format has been tremendously helpful.
I would say similar to both of those. Those I think are both very important. And I would say, the ability also to teach. There's a lot of things from teaching, be it from, translating complex ideas to people who might not understand the ideas. So teaching stats courses, where you're really trying to break things down for people in social work who didn't want to be taking stats classes. So I think there was a lot of things there that in teaching, you learn how to give feedback, you learn how to, deal with other issues that pop up in the job.
I was trained partly in ethnography, and so I would say the capacity to read the room is something that you should begin to develop as a PhD student. When you're going into a room and you think that you're intending to learn, I encourage you to take a step back, pause, look around, begin to notice dynamics around you, and that will help you then assess your own practices as you move into spaces that maybe are not your spaces, and to begin to understand how to situate yourself, how to begin conversations, how to help move your insights and your positions into space that maybe you don't feel is necessarily accessible to you otherwise. So learning to read the room, I think, was something that was really important to me, maybe less taught than sort of, I don't know, developed over time.
Yeah, it's interesting because we do learn a lot of things through osmosis. But the other thing that I'm hearing from many of you is just this idea of there are things that you're learning that apply in so many settings, but we don't always think that they do. We're just socialized to think of them only in the academy, but they are important in so many other settings.
Yeah. Maybe building on that question just a little bit, I will kind of ask for, if we have among our audience folks who are earlier in the program or for doctoral program directors thinking about students as they get started, are there any kind of tips you all have, experiences to seek out, things to do if you want to be preparing for a range of careers? So skills that you find useful that if you could go back, you would, want to be sure you invested in to be ready for the roles that you're in now.
I'll go again. I think, at least for me, I would say it's not so much being that there were additional classes or certificates or trainings. It's more so of understanding the connection. So, as an executive, you need to do, there's leadership, there's fiscal management, there is over visioning, there is strategy, there's all these things these skills that you are expected to be able to bring to a issue or problem to generate solutions. One of the things I think that I underestimated was how much whether as a graduate student who was winning grants and having to manage grant dollars, or in some of the administrative roles I was playing as a graduate student that also involved financial management and those things, how that small work was developing some foundational understandings about how do you manage, how do you set budgets, how do you create infrastructure to manage and have checks and balances to ensure that things are within scope, that you're not spending money the wrong ways, that you have your receipts, you have your evidence. I think for me, it was more about seeing how those skills, I felt like I'm doing this because I'm a scholar and I'm going to be a faculty member, but actually these are foundational skills that in professional roles across the board outside of academia are just normal and are required in order to be competitive and to be functional and efficient in those roles.
Yeah, I think I like that a lot, Michelle. And what the other thing that you're bringing up that I think is so interesting, and I think other people, Bart, you mentioned this too, just like that when you are teaching, you are leading, and you don't necessarily think of it that way, but in fact, you are. You are responsible for setting the tone in that classroom, for leading people through information, for helping people shine in their own ways, and so there are lots of uh, you're developing a lot of skills that you don't necessarily know that you are, and that you are then perhaps able to translate into new settings.
Mm-hmm. The financial management piece, I think that's we spent some time in graduate school learning about the grant process and how to apply for grants, how to make sure that your ideas are really great, but then the pieces of, yeah, how do you set budgets? And if you're going to work in an organization, you're going to lead a department, you need to understand things about budgets. I would say the other thing I would throw in there is just working with messy data. I think as doctoral students, as graduate students, oftentimes will work on an advisor's project where the data is already collected, it's already cleaned, or maybe we're collecting it. But the one thing that time and time again, when we're doing evaluation projects internally or we're doing other projects, data is messy. It's not the data you want. There's a lot of missing data. If you're working with clinical populations, you're not going to have the data collected in the way you want it. It's not going to be clean. You're going to have to organize it and keep it organized and keep people motivated to get you the data. And so I think finding opportunities to work in quote unquote real world settings with data, and that could be through a independent study, it could be through a particular practicum that somebody might do, but working with a local agency to help them understand their data, and then learning to write in non-academic ways about really, you can still do very rigorous science, but explaining it in a way that people can understand.
I would add to what Bart just said. The point, not only being able to write, but I think communicate in conversation. Conversations are so important, and we can tend to have kind of funny conversations in the academy, including while we're going through our PhD programs. And so, no one wants you referencing all of those people in a regular conversation when you're trying to convince them that they should build a 5-year model or change their K through 12 curriculum or whatever else it might be, because you've brought them evidence that's significant for their practice. So, rehearsing the way that you make your points I think is something that I would strongly advise. On the teaching thing, one of the best things that I did actually was a certificate, Michelle. It was a certificate in higher education pedagogy at the University of Lancaster in England. And we were forced to do it because we were new faculty. And we were encouraged forced to go observe other teachers. And that I found incredibly helpful. It's very hard to find the time when you're a PhD student, but I learned through that different techniques that people would use to get points across very succinctly, clearly, and with evidence. And I watched a computer scientist teach this just absolutely brilliant class where I came out being like, gosh, maybe I should have done computer science. And anyone who knows me knows that he was really convincing then, because that is not for me. But he was so brilliant in the ways that he would boil down things. And I began to use that in my teaching, and I realized that, yes, those skills that we learn in teaching certainly do help us with other things, but not just learning your own teaching, observing other teachers who you hear are great, making sure that you carve out the time for yourself to do that, because then they travel. All the folks that you see here in this room have done it. We've traveled with those skills elsewhere.
Great. So let me just bring in a couple things from the chat. We do have some questions. This is specifically coming from international students, and it is about students that might require work visas. how they should frame their jobs at nonprofits or at tech companies. So I will just say, and people correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that if international students are in this country, and of course all of this changes daily, but that if they are in this country, this is not such a big problem, that there is a change in status that happens, but that companies are not having to pay these huge amounts as they would if they were bringing someone in from out of country at the moment. So that's my understanding about that. But this idea of, let me just open it up to the group because you all may have more knowledge than I do or other ideas about how people should frame their skills.
I can go ahead being an international student in this country. So, but this was like many years back when things were a little less tumultuous than what it's currently. Now, nonprofit, and so there are two things here that we are talking about. One is immigration, and the other is technology company. I can talk about what is it like in the tech company. So the most important thing is they will sponsor your visa, but that is becoming a little tricky. So let me be very honest about that. It's and it's the overall climate around tech company, right? There's so much of layoffs that are happening, and and with the push from the government and whatnot, it is. But if you want to know about how to frame your narrative, I think the tech companies, they do not really like, I think it's the previous conversation we're happening. It's the storytelling part. And like, I have 20 publications, but that does not imply anything for them. It's about how you made an impact. What's the number? If you were able to change something, what will they do with the research? Okay, you did a cool research, but so what? So it's like, so if you can frame your conversation around that and the value that you can bring to a company, or even in a nonprofit too, I guess. But again, I'm not a specialist in that area. I do not want to comment, but definitely that's that. But regarding, immigration, that's a changing story every day. And who knows, like even if I tell you something is going to change the next day. But I think if I remember, it's been so long. Like you get an OPT, I think, optional practical training. And I think for those of us in social sciences, we get it for a year. Those in STEM get it for 3 years. So I would highly recommend start doing a job search and start networking early on if you want to land up in any place other than academia, because it takes time. And the 1 year really flies by. It happened for me too. So it's kind of hard. And you need to ask your company or wherever you're working to sponsor. And I think that's becoming a tricky issue.
So I think that kind of lends itself to this question of, with I guess I find myself thinking about the CV versus the resume. Often in my mind, I think of these things as really the same thing, and their purpose is the same. However, their structure is quite different and their style is quite different. So is there anyone that could sort of speak to that and thinking about how those students might prepare their materials differently? I love what you're bringing up, Shubha, about storytelling. And, how does that translate actually into your cover letter, into your resume? Anyone?
I can just go ahead. No, I can just say, like, in my day-to-day work, I work with, tech leaders, people who are VPs, like people who have built Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. So for them, and I applied at a very senior level when I applied for this role. But nevertheless, a CV is, when I look at my academic CV, like we list out all your publications, industry does not matter. It is the skill set you're bringing. It's the first paragraph. So I think that requires a separate session in itself, how you prepare your CV, because it's a completely different story. You have to start with a narrative and then get into your skill set, show how you have demonstrated the skill set, what impact is that it had on outcomes, give numbers, and that's that. Publications actually is the last thing. Nobody cares. They value, some of them value, but until unless you are in like a team which is like very like, which is not for us, but people in the modeling team and stuff like that, for them it matters, but not for us. So publication is not that important, but what is important is what impact you have had, and you have the numbers to prove that. And you have, it's like, what did you do? How did you do it? What impact did it land? Let me say, this is the thing. So if you can say that cohesively, and of course, that's the first step. And then you have interviews. Like if you get through the interview stage, you'll have a whole research interview where they will ask you about methodology. If it's a quant methodology, if it's qual methodology, if it's mixed method, you have a quant and a qual methodology, and you have interviews that are separate. And then the most important thing is, how do you translate your work into practice? You have done this research. So the question is, so what? They'll ask us. You did it. So then how do you transfer that? And so product sense and things like that. So yeah, it's a whole different thing to be covered in such a short time, but happy to talk more.
Yeah. And I could
Right.
just add a couple of short
go ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
additions to that. But yes, it needs to be its own thing. Resumes are much shorter. 2 pages in some industries is pushing it. Some industries want a 1-page resume. 3 pages is probably pushing it. But outside of what Shubha already has shared, I think the other pieces are, when you are thinking about a resume, unlike a CV, which is like a complete like census of your history, a resume is your last 5 to 10 years, period. Like whatever, it doesn't matter how great it is. If it's not the last 5 to 10 years, unless it really has some importance, you probably wouldn't want to waste space in your resume on that thing. And the other key around building resumes is you don't get one. With CVs, you basically create one, and that's the CV, you just add to it. With resume, your resume is customized for every position you apply for. So what skills, how you frame your sort of that framework Shubha had just sort of laid out depends on what position you're trying to apply for, and how you're trying to speak to the specific skill set and experience and expertise you're going to bring for that position.
Can we maybe ask you all for your advice now, for probably particularly for those who are on the job market right now who are listening? Where do you look to find jobs like those you're in? And tell us a little bit about the applying and any tips you have for that application process. So Bart, like, how did you find the role at Prevent Child Abuse America, and where would you post if you were hiring for your team?
Well, I got the post because I was consulting with them at the time, and so but I think that's sort of the recommendation that I give, is that you have to start getting out there into the spheres of organizations that are doing work that you respect, and so you got to get to know them. You got to get to know their work. I think the points about the resumes and CVs, you have to do your homework. And so when you're crafting a resume or a CV, you want to tell the story of, I've got a skill set and I understand what you do, and here is how I could be able to do those skills at this organization. I think in hiring, it becomes very clear when people are sort of just copying and pasting a new address because they're applying to 50 different places. And so you really got to know these places. So do your homework. And, when we're posting, a lot of it is, we try to go out national. We try to get onto as many listservs as we can. But a lot of it is, we try, through working at a national level, we get to know a lot of people, and we don't frequently have positions come available. And so typically it's through our networks. We post on socials, we try to get it out there. But I just say, as you're looking for positions, just start getting to know people and also understand what is it that you want to spend your time doing. And so we're saying research, but are you the person that wants to come up with the ideas? Do you want to be doing the budgets? Do you want to be doing the hiring and firing on a project, be the PI? Or do you like just showing up and getting to use your research skills? You could work on a collaborative team of people who they've already got the funding and they need your quant skills, they need your qual skills, and you're not so set on what the topic is. I think it's got to take some time of self-reflection to think about, how do I want to spend my days? Do I and knowing how you want to apply the skills that you bring to the position.
So I like what you all are saying. I'm sort of taking notes about about different aspects of this, about like really getting to know these organizations, figuring out what's in your, if you are attached to a particular area, a particular subject matter, so that there isn't necessarily going to be a job board for that, or they're not necessarily going to be sending these announcements to the GADE job board, for instance, that we have, or to CSWE or something like that, although maybe sometimes. So it is going to take a little bit more legwork, perhaps, on your part. I wanted to go to Betsy really quick to think about, if people are interested in academic jobs that are overseas, where do they look for those?
Yeah, well, some of those might show up on your disciplinary newsletters and so on. So I know that the American Association of Geographers, a lot of overseas universities will post positions in that, and they have a whole jobs section. So you should certainly look to see if there are equivalents in a country that you think you're interested in working in. I mean, what I would really strongly encourage you to do as well is to look for those international networks that are most inspiring or exciting for you, and to make sure that you actually get to those meetings, get to those conferences. I think early on, I had gone to the British Geographers Conference, the equivalent of our US Geographers Conference. I had also been to several in Latin America. And, now we have, for the Young Carers Network, we have an international conference. When I go there, I meet individuals who are doing their PhDs. We often talk about, different positions that we know are emerging, or we talk about the kinds of research that is beginning to take place in Japan. Those networking opportunities are really important for expanding into an international higher education network. I also would, make sure that you are doing a bit of groundwork. So if there's a country that you are drawn to, find out a lot more about the ways in which their universities are structured, and what each, the nomenclature for positions. For instance, I was a lecturer, which is more like an assistant professor when I first started in the UK. Make sure that you understand the structures of the units themselves. Do they usually organize their positions under research clusters, such you would be working with a senior professor and all of the work under them aligns with their field? So learn a little bit about that, and do not be shy about just talking. I mean, I think, let's face it, a lot of my colleagues abroad have been fielding many questions from scholars in the US. And so this will not be shocking or surprising for you to approach them and just ask them. Let them know that you would consider, you're very interested in perhaps working abroad. And then the final thing that I would recommend is, depending on your personal circumstances, do not, turn up your nose at a good-looking postdoc, because that is, at least in the social sciences, more social science-leaning humanities, postdocs are often the entry point for a lot of folks coming out with their PhDs, at least in the EU. So a postdoc would allow you to go someplace, work really closely with some people, get into the research environment, get into the university environment, make a decision for yourself about how it feels putting on the British university bureaucracy coat in my case. And how, is it comfortable? Is it a little tight? If you have the opportunity to expand and explore a little bit, force yourself to have those conversations, force yourself to reach out. There's nothing to lose in doing that, and watch for good postdocs. Times Higher Education has a job alert system where you can watch for jobs, especially in the UK, but really it's across Europe. So that's the other thing that I would recommend if you just want to start seeing what's there, what do people put in.
The London Times UK, is that what you
No, it's called Times Higher Education, and I will find it. Mimi, I can't tell if I can pop anything visible in the chat, but I think I can pop it to you. So I'll find that and put it in the chat.
To me, and I think I can do it. Yeah. Thank you. That's useful because I was thinking about it, and of like the Chronicle, I don't see really international jobs listed in the Chronicle of Higher Education here. So, John has put it.
John has it in the chat for everyone. Michelle, do you have anything you want to add? You've worked in, you've worked in government, you've worked with nonprofits, you've, been in multiple spaces. Kind of any tips for seeking and applying for jobs across the different spheres that you've worked in?
Yeah, I mean, I have to reiterate that relationships do matter. It sucks. But also, I think it's true for academia. As much as there might be this allure that we have this process and the best person gets the position, there's other dynamics that operate behind the scenes, including relationships that lead to whether person's placed in a faculty position or not. And so I would really encourage folks to, if they have a burgeoning interest in an area, to like go out and build relationships with them. If you have a fellowship, those were the things I leveraged. I didn't need income because I had a fellowship, which freed my capacity to do work and to volunteer and to show and demonstrate and to build relationships. And so I would encourage to think about the ways in which you have that flexibility to be able to kind of get yourself into the rooms and where people are going to know you and where opportunities begin to be created.
Thank you. And Shubha, different kind of sphere. How did you find your way into tech jobs? And if students who are listening are interested, thoughts about kind of how they can find opportunities?
Oh, in the tech. So again, building relationships. LinkedIn is a place. So I always kept my profile updated, and I got reached out by a recruiter. But over time, like once you're inside, of course, relationships matter, but go out, and there's no harm in actually, reaching out to people, building relationships, because a lot of this, what happens is now that the job market is really tough, and it has always been like that you need to have those relationships to actually have your CV also into the system. That does not guarantee you'll get a job, but for one position, there are 1,000 applications. And then you want your application to at least come to the notice of the hiring team. And for that, having these relationships, building those relationships is actually very important. So although these jobs remain posted on LinkedIn, on other places, there is always a preference given to internal employees, or it could be like when they're open outside, it's also about, who can vouch for your work. So that's why building relationships is very important. And so if there is anyone looking for a role, and happy to talk and guide them. Cannot guarantee anything, but at least can guide them, get to know them, because for us to even put in a referral, I need to know the person well enough and vouch for that person, because eventually it's going to come back to me, so but yeah, LinkedIn is one area. And if you want to get into technology, find recruiters. There are lots of recruiters. Make friends with them. Tell them you're a new grad and you would want to, know you're exploring opportunities. Does not guarantee. I have also emailed recruiters before. they don't respond. Don't take, first of all, never take these things personally, because it's not you. It's about, they are inundated with applications and you are one drop in the sea of ocean, in the sea. So I would say, like, that's okay, but keep trying, keep trying.
All right, well, that is a good call to end on. We are right at the hour or just over. So I just want to thank our presenters for being with us today. It has been really great to hear from all of you. I know I have learned a lot, and it's given us new ideas and things to think about that we can do here at GADE to be useful both to program directors and to students. So I know we could probably talk for another hour, but I know everybody has things to do, and so I won't ask you to do that, but I will just say thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you on another webinar.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.